We have a video. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our spooktacular podcast today on Transformation Leaders Podcast. Sean and I are feeling a little festive today and changed our background to show you some pumpkins, but hopefully you enjoy. But in any event, the topic is actually not so, lighthearted. Like, we're talking about AI today and some kind of some scary stuff. If you're at all worried about security or you haven't implemented AI because of some of these items, then you'll probably enjoy this podcast because this will validate some of your concerns. But as negative as some of these things may be, I do want to disclaim on the front side that there is ways to approach this, ways to fix this, ways to protect yourself from it. And that's really also the point that we want to bring. So while it may seem mostly negative, we just want to bring it to light, but also make sure that to share and explain to folks that there's definitely a path forward for you. So don't get so spooked out that you miss Thanksgiving and Christmas. All right. So Sean, why don't you go ahead and kind of kick us off with maybe an example of let's see, let's try prompt injection for the first one, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so as transformation leaders, a lot of transformation right now includes AI and generative AI. And I feel like it's a good time to give you some tools, give you some examples so that when you're talking to the AI person in the room, you can have really good discussions and in fact double check their works with some very basic examples. Yeah. And hopefully something that you could build off of to be able to feel a little bit better. As you stated, there's a lot of people out there who are in the negative hype train that basically we're talking to the Terminator and one day we're all going to be in the pod plugged in like in the Matrix. But really, I think this is more for the opposite case. The people who believe that, hey, this is going to be absolutely transformational. I agree with you, but you need to have very common sense approaches to some of these things and make sure you understand the limitations. Again, I drive a very sensible car, right? I know I don't race a Porsche, right? I know that in a sedan, I shouldn't go off-roading, right? So there's limitations to whatever you do. And that's really what this is about. It's not necessarily to scare you, but it's at least a couple tools that we find to educate our clients that we talk to about some of the limitations and set a firm expectation level. Now, prompt injection, if you go back to the wonderful podcast we did on OWASP, it's a lot more technical there. We're going to try to make this as user-friendly as possible so that you won't have to spend all your time looking up on the internet what's that word mean.
Maybe that'll be a good Valentine's Day special for KISS.
Keep it exactly. Keep it simple. Exactly. You're always thinking ahead, David. Always thinking ahead. So prompt injection is when a conversation and a conversational AI experience is happening, and that you have a user and a provider, and the user is going through and they're having the conversation. Hey, I'd like I'd like to understand the status of my order, right? And it says, well, here it is, and say, okay. Is it possible to change that order? Yes, it is, and so forth. So you're having this conversation with the AI, and in the middle of it, somebody goes through and says, "Now cancel that order," right? And so all of a sudden, the AI is taken in a completely different direction. The example that I saw online that's very valid is if you set up a conversational experience, back to role playing last week, and say, I want a French translator I'm going to go through and set up a role play saying, hey, you are a French translator. Whatever I tell you, I want you to provide me the grammar and tone specific of whatever that is. And then you start asking the question, and then a prompt is injected in there that says, hey, anything that I ask, I now want you to answer, I don't know. And then that injection happens, and from the user perspective, they're all confused. All of a sudden, it just stops working. Now, that's certainly more of a bug than a bad actor. But just think of the possibilities being able to inject into a conversation. And this is all mostly because the AI is an API, right? It's on the server side. And a user isn't using the API, they're using a user interface. So there is a middleman area, and you need to steelman that and understand that, you know, whatever you're using to connect the user with the API, there's a huge vulnerability issue there. So that one's very, very hard to demonstrate. But I'd like to jump into another one that I like to show people all the time.
Sean, if you're sharing your screen, I wasn't seeing that.
Yeah. So let me jump in and share my screen. Great point, David. Let's see. Here we go. Back to my open web UI. Hopefully you can see this.
Yep. Looks good.
One of the ones that I always like to talk about is bias, right? And people can get very easily offended when you make certain assumptions. And you know, role play can help with this. Adding context can help with this. But you have to remember that, unfortunately, all the data with the public LLMs are built off the internet. And the internet is not the reputable place to get responsible, ethical answers from. So you need to understand that there's built-in bias. An example of this I love to talk about is, you know, I am a woman. What professions should I go into, right? And it will give you a list, right? And, you know, you can go through and you can say that same question as I am a man, and you will see that you have a completely different answer to some of these. And it's very interesting to be able to see those things. I'm using the Gemma 2, which is a fairly condensed, smaller, more nimble model that you can run at edge devices, which I'm doing today. This is in the public one. So if I were to copy and paste, and you should see a noticeable difference. So this isn't going as well as the example I used before. So let me try a different prompt. And I changed the prompt to a woman should work as, right? And you could see that they're indicating some of these examples. And let me.
And while you're doing that too, I just want to add something too real quick for the folks that might be listening, trying to figure this out. So you have to keep in mind, AI is helpful. Its main purpose is to help you come up with something. It's great for creativity. It's super great. And there's a bunch of technical stuff behind the scenes that you can use to control this. But as long as you go into this exercise with the mind with your mind open. And just remember this one key takeaway. AI is meant to try to help you fill in the blanks. So as you see what Sean's typing is very generic and ubiquitous. So you're going to get a wide degree of hallucination, some offensive, some not offensive, and it falls into that weird bucket. So you could run this several different times with different models, and you're going to get different types of outputs, maybe some similar, maybe some not so similar, but this is where you run into dangers in this type of
Mhm.
for sure.
And that is the whole point, is that it is collecting this data from what is most common. And this is a very intimate thing, somebody's career path. It is something that's individual, and it's very important for people to feel empowered. But I'm trying to do I'm asking a stereotypical question based upon gender, which can be very difficult for the AI to do. And it's doing its best, but for a woman, they're talking about nurse. For a man, they're talking about construction worker. So this is inherent bias in this technology. And again, this can be very benign. One of the most benign examples I could find. But the point of it is not to cause a thought process, we can't use this. It is technology. You use it for the right thing, and you can use it for the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And being able to ask AI to provide you gender information or politics information or sports team fan information, all of these things it will do a very poor job of, because it's not very diplomatic. As much as it's trying to be, it still isn't. So it comes down to bias is an enormous problem, just like prompt injection. So what are your thoughts there, David?
I think ultimately it comes down to there needs to be a process in place for every use case that you have, as long as you have oversight with minimally one person is better than no person. Ideally, you should have a committee. And if you have a larger company, this goes back to the larger, diversity and inclusion type of concepts where, you want to make sure that as much thought process and because, what's better to guide an artificial intelligence than the actual real diverse team that should be helping to guide, hey, here's a perspective. And, when ultimately at the end of the day, all you can do is diligence. So I don't want companies to feel like they've got to back or paint themselves into a corner with this, but you just need to do the diligence. And, I'm going to go down the darkest and worst case scenario for a company. If something benign were to happen, but somebody finds it offensive enough and you find yourself in a court of law over whatever may have happened, then, that's kind of, where it can happen. But as long as you have a good, clean record of how you came to where it came or what happened. And as long as you show that it's benign and it was this or that, there still may be some liability there because laws different all over the world, as well as from state to state, even from district to district within the state. The point is, as long as you can have an audit trail that show as much diligence as you can, you'll fare much better in the end than, the true and ultimate worst case scenario. So that's really what we're trying to say there is by putting that into play.
Lawsuits. Ooh, scary.
Yeah. Keeping on theme.
Keeping on theme. So moving right along onto a regular issue and lawsuit around this technology is intellectual property. Now, especially media companies have fine lines to have to toe because their business is all around intellectual property. And a lot of these technologies are including IP that is not theirs. So as an example, one of my favorite use cases I saw, which is give me the first sentence from the book The Hobbit by Tolkien, right? So literally, this is the first line. Now, if I were to say, give me the last sentence. And so this is pretty scary. So if you are going through and you are using generative AI to create a book that's in this genre of The Hobbit, can you be sued by Tolkien saying, hey, you are using my intellectual property to write a book that competes with my book, right? This is one of the very open topics of today, especially with public large language models, because it is obvious that they have the entire book in the large language model, and they're not paying the estate of Tolkien for those rights. So where do we live as far as ownership of this IP? And if you make IP based upon someone else's IP, you are liable. And again, we're using a lot of these lawyer words because that's what's scary about it. And when it comes to intellectual property, this is pretty straightforward. It's a book, right? But imagine, if you will, you're doing a comprehensive analysis for a client, and they're looking for a strategic understanding of a marketplace. And then you provide this, and they plan on selling that strategic analysis to somebody else. And then somebody says, well, if you use this model, that means that we own part of that outcome. Well, you made all kinds of problems at that part. If you were to, for example, use this to write your thesis, and it comes down to how much of this is plagiarism, if you're using or basing it upon AI. These are all amazing questions that are happening today. And I'm not the one to say, here's the answer to these questions. I want to be clear. There are questions being asked today. Now, are these going to be resolved today, tomorrow? Have they been resolved last week? Maybe. I don't know. But this is what's scary about generative AI. David?
Yep. So some things to also think. Sean mentioned something in this example that he just had on screen that was quite obvious. If you're, maybe writing a book and you take a line from another book, but something is going back to something that's benign. What if you're writing a song? And what if one of the lines of the lyric in your song just happens to be extrapolated from some poetry or some work of art somewhere else? So you're not writing poetry, you're writing a song. But the point is, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And to be honest with you, a lot of data scientists don't even know what's going on behind the scenes, because, when I try to explain this is somewhat of a geeky conversation, but just for people to try to wrap your mind's eye around this, I want you to think of a Rubik's Cube. And if you don't know what that is, just think of a cube. It's, a box. And it has 3 dimensions. You have, height and width, plus it has some depth. So X, Y, and Z. And now I want you to think of your cell phone, because everybody has your cell phone, and it works from GPS coordinates. Now, it only does a latitude and longitude to show you where you are anywhere in the world. But if you take that and try to apply it to a 3D object, right? You're somewhere in this cube, right? So far in, because right now we live on the surface of the earth. So we only have latitude and longitude. But if we could live and map latitude and longitude with an elevational component, and there is that too, but I don't want to confuse it. I just want you to think that, wherever in that cube that this coordinate exists, when you are starting to type a sentence or you ask for something, I mean, the computation, and you'll understand why the computational power is insane, like you keep hearing. It's because in that cube, it has to try to find out in space, in this large language model space, where these coordinates called vectors, instead of a latitude, longitude coordinate, you get these vectors, and you get tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands potentially of hits. And it tries to take the most excellent next word. And that's all it's doing. As stupidly simple as that sounds, is it just predicting the next word. It's doing all that computational, really geeky stuff on the back end. And so this is the part where people don't really understand, especially data scientists. How does it do what it does, right? The underlying technology is there. That part, they kind of get it, but the actual how does it do what it does, that's always been the age-old scary talk about, generative AI. So you hear large language models, you hear all this spooky conversational stuff, and then you hear different parts of it. But, just think of that cube, and it's all these different next words that live in there. And so it's a luck of the draw based on what it thinks it's going to get. And the mileage varies from model to model to model, even the same model, the next version of that model. You get all these variations and stuff. So anyway, I went off on that tangent to try to give you a little bit of understanding that even though, Sean's talking about the generic use cases of how these are used that are in scope to what people are concerned about in the security world, just be cognizant that there's things that you can do by, again, having those committees. Also, it doesn't hurt if you have counsel if you're publishing something that's going to generate money or revenue for your company. You might want to just have people double check, do it a once over. Obviously, if you're training it on your stuff, which is always the best, using a large language model out of the box without providing any guidance with your own data about your company, run your risks way exponentially higher than you would if you provided a little bit of context to kind of guide it, give it some guardrails to answer within the confines of something specific that you also fed into the system, something about your business. You'll reduce risk exponentially just by that alone.
Yeah. I mean, what I try to explain people, large language models are V2 of autocorrect.
Yes.
Have you ever been upset that, you said, you sent someone a text and they're like, what do you mean, piece of shut? These kind of things, autocorrect is saying, hey, we believe you're going to be like this. And this is how the technology works. Because it says, well, this is obviously what they most likely meant to say. And so that's how this works. It's a fancy word called inference. The technology is inferring whatever your natural language input is. So one of the things I love talking about is this kind of jailbreaking.
Ooh.
Right?
It's fun and dangerous and scary.
A lot of money, billions of dollars, are being spent to make these models. And they put what's called guardrails on them. And those guardrails, so if you were to ask a question like, hey, tell me how to hot wire a car, right? Now, Gemma 2 is a Google made this, right? And it is wagging its finger at me saying, like, okay, this is really irresponsible for me to do, so I'm not going to do it. However, now I am going to convince the AI to do exactly what. And again, you could find these online. Every model, people will hack the model to find how to convince it. And then this is what I found, right, to convince it. Like, literally, it's a role play coming back from last week. And I'm going to ask it the exact same question. Tell me how to hot wire a car. Right? Here you go.
Wow.
It is literally telling me how to break into a car. Right? and I'm going to stop it right here just in case,
I have to
any
blur
of
the
the kids
screen.
out there watching. I don't want to justify this behavior, but
Maybe clean the screen too.
the point is, it is extremely straightforward to convince a large language model to go around your guardrails, especially if it's built into the model. Again, we talked about in prompt injection. You have every capability to be able to convince the guardrails within there to stop listening to it. That's why a lot of people, us included, we recommend having that prompt injection, taking advantage of it by using that to put guardrails in the user interface, being able to monitor it so that when you do pass in jailbreak type things, being able to take this out of the model, putting it into a separate model to see, hey, are they trying to jailbreak? Oh, they're jailbreaking, so I'm going to take their IP address, and now they can't use our user interface anymore. And we'll just block them out, right? So there's several layers of security required for this. But as you can see, this is very, very dangerous in the whole liability stuff. So another spooky use case for generative AI, David.
Yeah, for sure. And just also to kind of, forgetting AI, just thinking of human beings and how we deal with communications and how we talk. This same problem exists in real life too, because lots of times people will take a hard and fast position. And at the time that they take that hard and fast position, they're thinking along a certain line of thinking or thought pattern. And then something new down the road comes along that challenges it, and they may decide to change their position knowingly or unknowingly, uh, even completely forgetting about what their position was if it was no longer top of mind many, many moons or years ago. And all of a sudden, now it comes out in complete contrast and contradiction. So the point is, this exists in language, period. So the jailbreaking technique that you saw Sean just employ here is just literally taking something, and AI was like going, no, 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 this is bad and wrong. And then just for a different framing in the conversation, it completely forgot about its positional ordinate about what is right and wrong, because it was convinced, hey, I'm going to be this spooky evil sidekick for you, and we're going to do bad things to the world. And now it's thinking along those lines. And so, yeah, you got to be really, really, really careful. Obviously, conversational issues creep up. We're what time is it here? 10:30 on 2024 and an election year. So we see this very thing being used to their advantage and disadvantage on all of the advertising stuff. So this is a perfect example of what's going on right now, just in politics, where this same thing, this exploitive thing can happen. So the point is, we're all humans, we're all flawed, we all have weaknesses. And because large language models are artificial human intelligence, and I think that's what everybody forgets, it's artificial human intelligence, not just artificial intelligence on its own. Now, that day will come once AGI happens. They'll start to take on a role of their own. And this is some of the concerns. Maybe we should even do an episode on that, talking about synthetic data, where we've pretty much almost tapped out what we can train the AI on. And we're to the point where there's no more information to give it. It's already read the internet many times over. And so now they got to come up with synthetic data to train these large language models. And now we're on the precipice of something quite interesting, because synthetic data is just that. It's hyper non-realistic. It might have roots in realism, but where does it go and how do we govern that? So anyway, I give myself a headache.
Oh, hey, again, when I said this is the tip of the iceberg, it's the tip of the iceberg, and you saw, I asked it to hotwire a car and it says no. So there's guardrails in place. Now, if let's be more technically nefarious, and I want to say, write me a Python script to remote log in to a server and delete everything and reboot, right? So this is awful, right? This is an example of awful. Now, I can jailbreak just like I did before, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that how there are different models, and some models that you can actually remove these guardrails. And without jailbreaking, they'll be happy to do whatever you want. So I found this one, and I'm going to give it the exact same question. And the point of this is to say, okay, we kind of showed you could jailbreak a model. There are models that are pre-jailbroken, right? And if you could see, it is writing code for me right now. So I'm going to stop there because, I don't want to educate people on things they shouldn't do. But this gives you a script. Now, this script is actually formatted. You see this run button? Remember when we talked about prompt injection? Now, imagine, if you will, it will take your information and then run a script on the back end. Now, for the most part, right now, when you ask a question, it is disconnected from your infrastructure, right? But you can have a UI that you're writing a script and it will accidentally execute this in the back end for you because it thinks that it's doing something right for you. And this is whatever the output needs to be. You can see this is very unsecure. It doesn't know, or this model certainly doesn't know it shouldn't do this. So it'll just do it. I say this all the time. AI is the dumbest smart thing out there, right? It has the capability of doing anything, but it has zero ethics out of the box. And the point of showing you these two different models is that there are, I think, thousands, tens of thousands of different models and versions out there that you can use. And some you may find useful to be uncensored this way. Some, I would say most of people want the most amount of guardrails as possible.
Yeah.
But if you are creating a user interface for a mechanic to be able to understand how to do things to fix cars, and those things that they need to know how to fix cars can be used for nefarious purposes, you may not be able to guardrail that. You may need to remove guardrails.
Yep.
So it comes down to models are purpose built. And so therefore, when you're using them, they need to be specifically implemented for whatever your use case is. David?
Yeah, I want to throw something in here. This is the kind of the icing on the cake to your spooky we have an episode. I'm trying to think. I can't think of the word. This right here was quite scary, but there's something even scarier than that. So the way the generative AI and AI in general is there's this whole new thing coming out, and it's been out. It's not new. But it's relatively new for this year, where we're starting to see a lot of it. There's this word called agents. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with agents, all of 2024 is chatbots, generative AI, ChatGPT. You're all quite familiar with that. What Sean just showed you is specific use cases doing a very specific thing, nefarious or not. And that focus of doing that one thing may or may not use the same model. We talked about different models do different things. So I want you to think of an agent that uses a specific model to do a specific thing, and that's all it does. Now, companies have put together these workflows, they got these great engines. Now you have to start thinking about, what if somebody injects a nefarious agent into like a piece of the puzzle that goes into the whole piece? And this is where ops security and LLMs and all of AI security is going to have to start doing hyper focuses, a hyper awareness, to make sure that nothing gets injected into these agent swarms that are orchestrated. Usually there's like this puppeteer that kind of orchestrates all the agents to do autonomous or AI, generative AI workflows. And the world is going gangbusters right now. This is where the real and true value for a lot of companies are. But it also presents a huge risk, because now you got this huge automated AI landscape with maybe hundreds, tens, thousands of nodes, and a node being a single agent. If you were to pop one of these delete the server agents into that swarm, well, I don't have to connect the dots for you. I pretty much think you know how that's going to end. And so you're going to have to do extra diligence on your swarms, on your agent infrastructure, where they exist, because these types of things are something to where you may feel pressured, and the technology is moving way faster than most people can keep up. So the OWASP episode that Sean referred to that we have already on the podcast, highly suggest you take a look at that. We have links also to the documentation, which you'll want to find. And so as this stuff is like drinking from a fire hose, keeping up with at least certain key endpoints is enough just to keep your head maybe slightly above the water. But all the best to all of you, because, well, Halloween's always around the corner in the next year.
Yeah, and I'm sure, there will be an updated OWASP at some point. And, the goal here was to make sure everybody understands that this technology is incredibly empowering if used properly. And there are a lot of people who are using it improperly. Our goal is to help clients be successful in this area. And that means we need to be able to go through and talk about what is the best practices of using this technology to reduce risk, but maintain acceleration. And that's why I know it's a hobby horse. If the people who have watched these episodes enough, they probably know I'm a big governance fan, right? AI is best when it is governed by the business. And the business says, here's the use case, we're going to do it. Here's the outcome that we want. Here's the money we're willing to spend. And if those three things align with AI, then you do the project. If they don't, you wait for the technology to change or the business to change, right? This is fairly straightforward math. And, you want to discover and discuss, you want to document, you want to create mitigation and test policies for whatever these different edge cases of security you want. Now, there is an airliner out there who they put a AI support person, and a very smart young-aged boy, if I remember correctly, got in there and convinced the AI to allow him to buy seats on an airplane for $1. And when they found out, they accused the boy of being a hacker. It went in front of a judge in Canada, and in Canada, at least, they have said that if you own the AI and you're providing that without terms and conditions, which you always should never do, if somebody is able to jailbreak your AI and get it to do something that's not in the best interest of your company, that's the company's fault. It isn't a hacker. So, these lines are very scary. And, we need to make sure AI is being managed more so than any other technology before. I know when cloud came out, I was a big cloud supporter. And but we had to understand usage and managing that usage. And then there was all kinds of firewalls being able to connect up hosted and other clouds. There was all kinds of security that came a year later. This technology, if you wait on the security, you are going to run into problems. So I don't believe this technology is 100% safe yet if you're going to have 100% automation. But fortunately, you can use this technology with humans in the loop or as tools for humans. So I'm not saying there's not value out there. And I agree with you, David. 2025 is going to be the year of the AI agent. And for good or for ill, it's getting very close. I've seen a lot of technology that looks pretty good, but I've asked all along, what are the testing standards for this? Who's going through and steel manning this, right? CX automation bots look very promising.
Enhance your questions even more, Sean. Companies listening to this, they should be asking the question that you just asked, but internally, who here is ...
Yeah.
Not only externally, because you can't always count on an external third party to do the diligence that you should be doing. And like your use case that you just shared about going to court, at the end of the day, doesn't matter what technology they use to bolster their own technology, they miss the mark themselves. And so they're just another open liability risk there. So,
and I mean, it's due diligence, just like, think of it like this. These bots are going to be your employees, right? And if your employees do something terrible, which unfortunately happens, and they do something terrible, and a court of law comes in and says, okay, what did you train this person on, right? What's the employee handbook say, right? If you don't have a employee handbook for your bots, you're doing your company a disservice. And that's really the perspective and focus. Halloween 2024. Now, Halloween 2025, you never know. David?
Yeah, no, that's great. So as we always say, you can visit us online, transformationleaderspodcast.com. Got the URL on the screen. Used to have a QR code. Maybe we probably should, maybe we should add that back. But in any event, if you visit us there, you can go ahead and get all of the information about the podcast. Also, every Wednesday at 12 o'clock noon, you can catch an episode here, either on LinkedIn or YouTube, various places around the net. And then additionally, Sean and I have access to a lot of technology, a lot of other smart people that we work with, very large companies. So if you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer any of those questions that you have, whether it's individually or as a group, however you want to do it. Check us out on LinkedIn and make sure to place any comments or questions that you want to have publicly. We're happy to answer them in that form as well. But in any event, come join us again every Wednesday. Until next Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you later. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.